In late 1941, Southeast Asia stood on the edge of collapse. Japan's expansion across the Pacific was accelerating with relentless precision, driven by the need for resources and the belief that Western colonial powers could be broken quickly and decisively. British planners understood the danger, but they also clung to an assumption forged by decades of naval tradition, that heavily armored capital ships could still deter aggression through presence alone. To project that confidence, the Royal Navy assembled Task Force Z, a small but symbolically powerful formation dispatched to Singapore. At its core was HMS Prince of Wales, a modern battleship equipped with advanced fire control systems and thick armor meant to withstand punishment no aircraft was expected to deliver. Alongside her sailed HMS Repulse, older but fast, commanded by officers who trusted seamanship and maneuver as much as steel. What Task Force Z did not have was air cover. Fighter squadrons were scarce in the region, and those available were outdated and stretched thin. The decision was made to sail without carrier support, a choice that reflected both strategic necessity and dangerous confidence. Battleships, after all, had survived bombs before. Few believed torpedo aircraft could pose a decisive threat in open seas. On the night of December 9th, the force moved north along the Malayan coast. The objective was simple: intercept Japanese landing forces believed to be operating near Kuantan and strike them before they could consolidate their foothold. Radio silence was strictly enforced. Surprise, the commanders believed, was still possible. But this plan rested on a fatal miscalculation. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft had already located the British ships. By the early hours of December 10th, Japanese air bases in Indochina were preparing a coordinated response. Crews loaded torpedoes and bombs, rehearsing attack patterns designed to overwhelm anti-aircraft defenses through speed, low altitude, and multi-directional assaults. Aboard the British ships, dawn arrived quietly. The sea was calm, visibility good. There was no immediate sign of danger until the distress signal arrived from a distant destroyer, reporting a Japanese bomber attack. In that instant, the illusion of invisibility shattered. Orders were given. Action stations were called, guns were manned, engines brought to speed. Yet even as crews moved with practiced discipline, a grim truth became impossible to ignore. The enemy would strike from the air, and there would be no friendly fighters to intercept them. As the first Japanese aircraft engines echoed across the sky, the opening phase of the battle was complete, not with gunfire, but with realization. The Royal Navy had sailed into a new era of warfare armed with old assumptions. What followed would expose the cost of that mistake in brutal clarity. The first wave came out of the clouds with chilling precision. Japanese bombers descended in disciplined formations, their approach calm, deliberate, and devastatingly rehearsed. For the crews aboard HMS Repulse and HMS Prince of Wales, this was no longer a theoretical threat. The age of naval aviation had arrived in full force. Repulse was hit first. High-level bombers released their payloads, and towering columns of water erupted alongside her hull. One bomb struck amidships, tearing through the upper deck and exploding below, scattering men and twisted steel across the hangar. Yet remarkably, she retained speed. Smoke rose, but her engines answered the helm. For a brief moment, it seemed seamanship and momentum might still prevail. That illusion shattered when the next formations appeared. Dozens of Japanese aircraft now converged from multiple directions, executing a textbook pincer attack designed to dilute British anti-aircraft fire. The gunners opened up immediately. Tracers arced skyward, barrels overheated. Shells burst, but too far behind their targets. The Japanese pilots were faster, lower, and far more aggressive than anything the Royal Navy had trained to counter. Then came the torpedoes. Skimming just above the waves, the attackers pressed in under intense fire, holding their course until the last possible second. On Prince of Wales, Captain Leach ordered hard turns to comb the torpedo tracks. For a moment, it almost worked. Then the first torpedo struck, ripping into the port side. Flooding followed, but it was the second hit that sealed her fate, smashing into the stern and opening a massive breach near the engine spaces. Water surged inward. Power failed. The battleship began to lose speed, then control. With her steering compromised and electrical systems failing, Prince of Wales became a stationary target. Yet the guns kept firing. Crews fought waist-deep in water to restore power and contain flooding, knowing the odds were slipping away with every passing minute. Orders were given to counter-flood compartments in a desperate attempt to level the ship, an act that bought time but increased vulnerability. Meanwhile, Repulse demonstrated what skill and audacity could still achieve. Captain William Tennant threw his ship hard over again and again, threading her through torpedo wakes with breathtaking precision. 19 torpedoes were avoided in succession. The battle cruiser twisted and turned like a destroyer, her massive hull responding to every command. But even mastery has limits. As the attack intensified, Japanese aircraft adjusted their timing and angles. Torpedoes came from both sides at once. Repulse could evade one spread but not two. The first hit did little. The next was catastrophic. Flooding spread rapidly. Her rudder jammed. Momentum turned into helpless motion as she began circling, unable to escape the converging strikes. By early afternoon, the outcome was no longer in doubt. What had begun as a contest of steel and gunnery had become a ruthless demonstration of air power. In less than 2 hours, two of Britain's most powerful warships had been neutralized not by enemy fleets, but by aircraft launched from distant airfields. The climax of the battle had passed. What remained was consequence. By early afternoon, the battle had crossed a point of no return. What remained was not a contest of tactics, but a struggle against time, water, and gravity. Aboard HMS Prince of Wales, the situation deteriorated with brutal speed. Multiple torpedo strikes had torn open her hull, flooding critical compartments and crippling the ship's electrical systems. With power lost at the stern, the steering motors were dead. The battleship could no longer answer her helm. Captain John Leach understood the danger immediately. Without a level deck, the remaining anti-aircraft guns were nearly useless, their barrels angled too high to engage low-flying attackers. In a desperate but necessary gamble, he ordered the flooding of starboard void spaces to counter the growing list to port. The ship steadied slightly. The guns could fire again. But this choice came at a terrible cost. The Prince of Wales was now even more vulnerable to the next torpedo hit. And the next hit came. Another wave of Japanese aircraft swept in, exploiting the battleship's limited maneuverability. Inside the ship, sailors fought to keep pumps running while wading through waist-deep water, knowing full well that the sea was winning. Engine rooms drowned. Compartments fell silent. The battleship slowed to a crawl, then nearly stopped. Nearby, HMS Repulse was facing her own reckoning. For more than an hour, Captain William Tennant's extraordinary ship handling had defied the odds. Torpedoes passed harmlessly astern or alongside as Repulse twisted through the attack patterns. Crew members would later recall the pride they felt as their massive battle cruiser maneuvered like a far smaller vessel. But skill could not overcome geometry. Japanese pilots adapted quickly, coordinating attacks from both port and starboard. A torpedo struck amidships, then another under the hull. Flooding spread rapidly through the lower decks, destroying engines and jamming the rudder. The ship began circling helplessly, her speed now a liability rather than a defense. The order to abandon ship came with painful clarity. On Repulse, discipline held to the end. No man left his post until commanded. When the call finally echoed through the ship, sailors poured onto the deck, cutting loose life rafts and climbing over the side into oil-slicked water. Some never heard the order, trapped below by damaged loudspeakers and flooding compartments. Within minutes, the battle cruiser rolled onto her side, her stern lifting high before she slipped beneath the waves. Prince of Wales followed soon after. Leach remained aboard almost to the last moment, overseeing the evacuation with quiet resolve. Hundreds of men crossed to the waiting destroyer Express on makeshift lines as the battleship listed further. When it became clear that nothing could save her, the final order was given. The sea claimed the ship slowly, then all at once, as she capsized and vanished. In just a few hours, Britain had lost 2 capital ships and hundreds of trained sailors. The material loss was devastating. The human cost was immeasurable, and the strategic consequences would echo far beyond the waters off Malaya. The sinking of HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse sent shockwaves far beyond the waters off Malaya. For the first time in history, modern capital ships had been destroyed at sea by aircraft alone, without the presence of an opposing surface fleet. The implications were impossible to ignore. In Washington, naval planners understood the meaning immediately. Just days earlier, the United States had witnessed its own awakening at Pearl Harbor. Now, the British disaster confirmed what American officers were already beginning to accept. Battleships, no matter how heavily armored, were no longer the decisive instruments of naval power. Air superiority had become the true currency of control at sea. This realization reshaped American naval doctrine. Aircraft carriers, once considered auxiliaries to the battle line, moved to the center of strategic thinking. Training, ship design, and fleet organization were rapidly adjusted to reflect a new reality, one in which detection, speed, and coordinated airstrikes mattered more than armor thickness. The lessons drawn from the fate of Task Force Z would later influence American carrier operations across the Pacific, from the Coral Sea to Midway and beyond. For Britain, the consequences were even more immediate and painful. The loss of its most powerful ships in the Far East left Singapore exposed and shattered the myth of imperial invincibility. Japanese forces advanced rapidly, encountering far less resistance than expected. What had been intended as a deterrent mission became a symbol of strategic overconfidence and outdated assumptions. Globally, military observers took note. The battle marked the definitive end of the era of battleship dominance, a truth that had been hinted at before but never demonstrated so conclusively. Naval academies around the world would study this engagement not for its heroics alone, but for its unforgiving clarity. Courage and discipline had not been enough. Adaptation had come too late. Yet amid the strategic recalculations, one lesson stood above all others. Technology does not wait for tradition to catch up. War rewards those who anticipate change and punishes those who assume yesterday's victories will guarantee tomorrow's survival. The waters off Malaya did more than claim two great ships. They redrew the blueprint of modern naval warfare. When the sea finally closed over the wrecks, the battle was over, but its meaning was only beginning to take shape. In a matter of hours, confidence built over generations had been stripped away by aircraft launched from distant runways. Steel, armor, and tradition had met a force that did not need to see its enemy to destroy it. The loss of HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse was not merely a tactical defeat. It was a turning point in the history of warfare. The battleship, once the ultimate symbol of national power, had been rendered vulnerable in a way that could no longer be denied. From that day forward, no navy could afford to ignore the sky. Yet to remember this event only as a lesson in technology would miss its deeper significance. Amid the chaos and destruction, there were acts of discipline, leadership, and quiet courage that deserve equal weight. Sailors remained at their posts until ordered away. Officers chose duty over survival. Decisions were made not for glory, but to save as many lives as possible when hope was already fading. These moments remind us that history is not shaped solely by victories. It is shaped by how people respond when plans collapse and certainty vanishes. The men aboard those ships did not change the outcome, but they defined the character with which it was faced. Decades later, the wrecks still lie on the seabed, silent witnesses to a morning when the future arrived without warning. They serve as memorials, not only to those who were lost, but to a hard-earned truth. War evolves faster than tradition, and complacency carries a terrible price. For modern audiences, especially those living in an age of rapid technological change, the story still resonates. The question is no longer about battleships or bombers, but about readiness, humility, and the willingness to adapt before crisis makes the decision for us. So consider this: when history offers a warning, do we listen, or do we wait until the cost becomes unavoidable? If this story made you reflect on the lessons of the past, share your thoughts below. And if you value careful, respectful explorations of military history, consider joining us as we continue to examine the battles that shape the world we live in today.